Alright, welcome to our first lesson on World War II. We'll be looking at the road to World War II first, and then we will actually talk about the fighting itself. Actually going to see the beginning of the war, but then the second set of videos will be on America fighting in the Second World War. Now, when World War I ended, European countries at the end of the war were facing new things again. We have the beginning of new revolutions, we've got economic depression, and the rise of strong and powerful dictators that are driven by two things: nationalism and territorial expansion. Alright, and these dictators are going to include Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Benito Mussolini. Now, the Treaty of Versailles was supposed to be the treaty that provides a just and secure peace. But instead of being the treaty to end all wars, it ended up being the anger and the resentment towards the Europeans by the Germans. They grew more resentful of the treaty. They thought the treaty that was too harsh and too punitive on the German people. The victors installed a lot of new countries were created. One of these was the Weimar Republic. Alright, many of these new countries became overwhelmed from the start and struggled economically. And here in the picture, you see a woman that is burning in 1923, feeding bundles of money into the furnace. Why? Well, the value of the money is so low that the money is practically worthless. You're better off putting it in to burn to keep you warm at night. That's what we call inflation. This is the value of the US dollar to the German mark between 1918 and 1923. In January of 1918, it was 5.21. And then in December of 1923, it was 4,200,000,000,000. Okay, that's how many marks equaled one US dollar. To make inflation even worse, they began printing bills like this bill here. This is a five mark printed, but over it is printed 50 million marks. So it's increasing the value. Alright, let's move to Russia now. After Lenin died in 1924, Joseph Stalin is going to take control of the Soviet Union. His goals include both ag and industrial growth, and he wants to make the Soviet Union no longer be this backwater country that's, even though it's large, but yet it's so behind the rest of the world. And he takes this backward rural nation and turns it into a major industrial power. In the first of his 5-year plan, Stalin is going to place all economic activity under strict state control. By 1937, Stalin will achieve this goal, and the Soviet Union will become the world's second largest industrial power. In his desire to purge anyone who threatened his power, Stalin would become responsible for the deaths of 8 to 13 million of his own Soviet citizens. Many more died of famine because of his economic policies, and others were sent to work in camps in Siberia. He sent millions of political prisoners to labor camps. And by 1939, Stalin will establish a totalitarian government in the Soviet Union. Alright, the USSR, remember, that stands for United Soviet Socialist Republics. In a totalitarian state, the government suppresses all opposition and has strict control over the citizens who have no right. Also, in a lot of totalitarian states, is citizens are expected to treat their dictator with adoration, just like Stalin is depicted here. Now, while Stalin has gained power, Benito Mussolini has already established power in Italy. He began seizing power by taking advantage of high unemployment, inflation, and a middle-class fear of communism. He was a strong public speaker. He helped appeal to national pride for Italians. And by 1921, Mussolini had established the Fascist Party. Fascism will stress nationalism and militarism and places the interests of the state above the interest of the individual. And these are extreme forms of nationalism and militarism. Despite the fact that the king, Emmanuel II, had already agreed to turn over its power to Mussolini, who was called Il Duce at this point, he ended up staging a mock takeover by marching his black shirts, which are his followers, through the streets of Rome in October of 1922. Meanwhile, we got Adolf Hitler, followed a similar path to Mussolini. When World War I ended, he was a jobless soldier drifting around Germany, but he decided to make I don't know about make a difference, but he decided to help a struggling group called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as Nazis. Despite its name, the party has no ties to socialism. Okay? And then you can see there's a picture here on Hitler on the far left. He had an ability as a great public speaker. He was a great organizer and drew many followers. And he quickly became the Nazi party leader. By calling himself the Führer, the leader, he promised to return Germany to its old glory. He also rose to power by criticizing the Treaty of Versailles as being unfair and humiliating to the proud German nation. Hitler explained in his book called Mein Kampf, or My Struggle, and in this book he wants to unite all German-speaking people under one grand empire, and he supported ideas like racial purity. So inferior races, which included Jews, Slavs, and anybody that wasn't white, were um, were created to form a workforce for the so-called master race, which included blonde, blue-eyed people, referred to Hitler as Aryans. Another element of Hitler's grand design was national expansion. Hitler calls this Lebensraum, or living space. And Hitler believed that if Germany is going to thrive, it needs to expand its land, despite what their neighbors might think of them. And by mid-1932, the Nazis would become the strongest political party in Germany. In January of 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor or Prime Minister of Great Britain. And once he gets in office, he begins dismantling Germany's democratic Weimar Republic and replaces it with a totalitarian government. Once in power, Hitler establishes the Third Reich, or Third German Empire. The first was during the Middle Ages, and the second came with the unification of Germany in 1871. According to Hitler, this Third Reich would last supposedly 1,000 years. Before World War II, FDR's policies in the U.S. reflected a desire to remain out of the growing conflict in Europe. He recognized the USSR diplomatically in 1933, and so we exchanged ambassadors between us and the Soviet Union. He helped lower tariffs, and he withdrew armed forces from Latin America. Alright, before we talk about the war, how the war in Europe begins, we're going to look at how militants gained control of Japan. Now, halfway around the world, we're going to see nationalist leaders seize control of the imperial government of Japan, and like Hitler, they wanted desired living space for their growing population. The 1930s were years of great fear in Japan, characterized by the resurgence of right-wing patriotism, weakening of democratic forces. Domestic terrorist violence occurred in Japan during the 1930s, plus an assassination attempt on the emperor in 1932. So they began stepping up their military and their aggression abroad. Now, Emperor Hirohito's reign lasted from 1926 to 1989. Hirohito followed a tradition and chose a name for his reign. His reign would be called Showa, or which translates to English, radiating peace. Now, despite this, he began a military buildup with several attacks on China and a dream of Pacific domination. And in 1931, Japan attacks the Chinese province of Manchuria, and swiftly Japan captured the province, which is roughly the size of Texas. Okay, so now you know what was going on in Japan a little bit, and so here is the Manchuria up here, so you can get an idea of where that looks like. Okay. Alright, we'll stop here for today. Thank you for listening.